This story is titled The Fiancée's Family and She Herself. Made fun of my elderly mother in front of everyone. I immediately canceled the wedding and took all the wedding money. Hey everyone, I'm a 31-year-old civil engineer living in San Diego, working at a respected firm in the city. Until recently, I was engaged to a woman named Kate, who I genuinely thought was the one I'd spend the rest of my life with. It's still hard to believe how quickly everything fell apart. I met Kate about 5 years ago at a friend's beach party. She had this amazing smile that lit up her whole face, and she was always ready with a quick joke that would have everyone laughing. We clicked instantly. One of those rare connections where conversation just flows naturally from the first moment. After dating for 4 years, I decided to propose last year. The timing felt perfect, and I truly believed she was the perfect person for me. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was that I wasn't just marrying Kate. I was also, in a way, marrying her family. Her parents, Robert and Maria, are something else entirely. They're the loud type who always need to be the center of attention and seem to have strong opinions about absolutely everything. At first, I thought it was just their personality, something I could learn to live with. But as time went on, I started seeing how their attitude affected everything around them, including their daughter and our relationship. Before I get into what ultimately happened, I need to tell you about my mom, Eleanor. She was the best person I've ever known. Kind, generous, and fiercely loyal to those she loved. She passed away 2 years ago after battling cancer for 3 long, painful years. I watched her fight that horrible disease with a grace and strength I couldn't imagine possessing myself. And somehow, she still found ways to put others first throughout her entire struggle. It was the most humbling thing I've ever witnessed in my life. My mother taught me everything I know about kindness, about generosity, and about standing up for what's right. She wasn't just my rock, she was a lifeline for so many people in our community. She had this special way of helping people without ever making them feel embarrassed or like they owed her something in return. She just quietly did what needed to be done, expecting nothing in recognition. That selfless generosity extended to Kate's family as well, though you'd never know it by how they talk about her now. When their family restaurant was about to shut down years ago, my mom co-signed a loan to help them out when nobody else would take that risk. She believed in them when banks and other family members didn't. My mom didn't stop there. She helped organize their finances and put together a business plan that made the restaurant profitable again. Thanks to her, their business survived, and Robert and Maria got to keep their livelihood. On another occasion, their restaurant's industrial oven broke down unexpectedly. They didn't have the money to replace it, which would have meant closing their doors temporarily and losing valuable business. My mom paid for a new oven outright, never asking for the money back, even though she could have used those funds for her own mounting medical bills later on. That's just the kind of person she was. Selfless to a fault. Then there was Kate's older brother, Tom. He was struggling to finish college and couldn't afford tuition for his last semester. My mom stepped in without hesitation and covered the cost so he wouldn't have to drop out. Education is one thing no one can take away from you, she always said. It wasn't just money she gave to Kate's family. It was her time and energy too. She spent countless hours helping them with everything from bookkeeping advice to babysitting Tom's kids so he could study. Not once did Robert, Maria, or Tom properly thank her for everything she did. Sure, they said thanks in passing, but there was never any real acknowledgement of the significant impact she'd had on their lives. My mom never cared about that, though. She wasn't in it for recognition or gratitude. She just wanted to help people who needed it. When my mom passed away, I was completely devastated. She was my whole world, and losing her felt like losing a fundamental part of myself. During that dark period, Kate was there for me, or at least I thought she was. Looking back now with clearer eyes, I realized that much of her support was just doing the bare minimum. She'd say things like, "You need to move on," or "Your mom wouldn't want you to be stuck in grief." Maybe those statements were true on some level, but they didn't feel comforting at the time. They just felt dismissive of what I was going through. As we got closer to the wedding, I started noticing more red flags that I should have paid attention to sooner. Kate was weirdly dismissive about including my mom in any part of our ceremony planning. When I wanted to include a small tribute to my mom during our vows, nothing elaborate, just a brief acknowledgement of her influence on my life, Kate just brushed it off. "Isn't that going to make people sad?" she asked with a slight frown. "Weddings are supposed to be happy occasions." I let it slide because I didn't want to start a fight, but little things like that kept piling up. It was becoming a pattern I couldn't ignore, though I tried my hardest to do just that. Then there were the comments from Robert and Maria, which grew increasingly difficult to overlook. They had this way of talking down to me, like they thought Kate was marrying beneath her station in life. Robert once joked about how Kate was upgrading her life by marrying someone from a simpler background. Maria would say things like, "Well, we all make sacrifices for love," as if Kate was doing me some huge favor by agreeing to marry me. Those comments stung pretty badly, but I kept my mouth shut for Kate's sake. Looking back now, I wish I'd spoken up sooner. Maybe I could have saved myself some heartache by seeing the situation for what it really was. Instead, I kept telling myself things would get better once the wedding was over, once all the planning stress was behind us. I couldn't have been more wrong about that. Fast forward to about a month before the wedding. That's when everything really started falling apart. Robert and Maria offered to host our rehearsal dinner at this fancy Italian restaurant where they had connections. At first, I thought it was a nice gesture. Maybe they were trying to smooth things over after all the snide comments and awkward moments during our wedding planning. I told myself that maybe this was their way of showing some class, of extending an olive branch. For context about this dinner, they didn't just offer to host it. They made a huge show of how generous they were being. Maria kept bringing it up in every conversation we had. "Oh, we've put so much effort into making this rehearsal dinner perfect," she'd say, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "It's going to be the talk of the town." Robert chimed in every chance he got, reminding me and everyone else how the restaurant was one of the best in the area and how lucky we were that they could secure it for our event. The whole thing quickly started feeling less like a gift and more like an ego boost for them. But whatever. I was focused on making the wedding happen smoothly, so I let them take control of the rehearsal dinner. That turned out to be a big mistake. As we got closer to the date, Robert and Maria's true colors really started showing through their thin veneer of politeness. Every conversation we had somehow turned into backhanded comments or passive-aggressive remarks. When I tried to confirm the guest list for the dinner, Maria rolled her eyes and said, "We'll handle it. You don't need to stress over the details. Just show up and enjoy." It was such a small thing, but it really bugged me. This was supposed to be our event. Shouldn't Kate and I have a say in who was coming? Then there was the menu drama. Maria made this huge deal about how they were curating a high-end dining experience for our guests. She kept saying things like, "We've got the chef to create something really special. Nothing like what you'd normally find back home." That last part was her favorite dig. Back home. She loved reminding me that I wasn't from their social circle, that I was from a small working-class town, and they never let me forget it. I tried my best to brush off their remarks, focusing on the bigger picture. I kept telling myself it was just one night, that I could smile, nod, and get through it without causing a scene. But even Kate was starting to act weird during this time. She'd always sided with her parents on most things, but in the weeks before the dinner, it got so much worse. Anytime I brought up an idea or expressed a concern, she'd just wave it off. "You're overthinking this," she'd say dismissively. "My parents know what they're doing." It wasn't just about the dinner anymore. It was how they collectively made me feel like an outsider in my own relationship. They treated me like I should be grateful that Kate was willing to marry me at all, and Kate never stuck up for me. If anything, she encouraged it by laughing along or dismissing me whenever I tried to bring up how I was feeling. A week before the dinner, there was an incident that should have been a huge red flag, one I wish I hadn't ignored. Kate and I were at her parents' house finalizing some wedding details. Maria was in full control mode, flipping through seating charts and going through flower arrangements like she was planning a royal wedding rather than our modest ceremony. I made a suggestion about changing the centerpieces to something simpler, something my mom would have loved. Nothing extravagant, just a small personal touch. Maria didn't even look up from her binder. "Oh, Eleanor had interesting taste, didn't she?" she said with a slight curl to her lip. "But this is Kate's day. Let's keep things modern, shall we?" I just froze in place, feeling like I'd been slapped. It was such a subtle jab, but it hit me hard right where I was most vulnerable. Kate didn't say a word in my defense. She just kept scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened, like her mother hadn't just insulted mine. I wanted to call Maria out right then and there, but I didn't want to start a fight so close to the wedding. So I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet, trying to keep the peace. Looking back now, I hate that I didn't say something. Every little insult and slight was adding up, building a wall of resentment that I was trying desperately to ignore. The day of the rehearsal dinner finally arrived. I could feel the tension in the air before we even left our apartment. Kate and I drove to the restaurant together, and I tried to make small talk along the way, hoping to lighten the mood. She was quiet, though, just scrolling through her phone and barely responding to anything I said. "Are you excited?" I asked, trying to gauge her mood. She just shrugged. "It's just a dinner, don't stress. Just a dinner." That's all it was to her, apparently. When we got to the restaurant, Robert and Maria were already there, acting like they owned the place. Robert was standing by the entrance, shaking hands with guests as they arrived like some kind of politician. Maria was busy giving instructions to the staff, micromanaging every little detail. The whole thing felt more like a corporate event than a family gathering meant to celebrate our upcoming marriage. The restaurant itself was over-the-top fancy white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, the whole 9 yards. It was the kind of place that screams, "Look how important we are," with every detail, and it just made me feel even more out of place than I already did. As guests started arriving, I noticed something weird. Most people were from Kate's side of the family. I saw maybe 3 or 4 people from my side, my dad, my sister, and a couple of close friends and relatives. Everyone else was either Kate's relative or one of her parents' business associates. They'd turned what should have been our rehearsal dinner into some kind of networking event for their restaurant. I pulled Kate aside when I had a moment. "Why aren't more of my family here?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. She gave me this exasperated look like I was being ridiculous. "Your family's small," she said matter-of-factly. "My parents had to fill the room somehow. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." That was her answer for everything lately. I bit my tongue and went back to mingling with the guests, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner wasn't about us at all. It was about Robert and Maria showing off to their friends and business connections. They'd hijacked what should have been our celebration and turned it into their personal spectacle. After everyone had eaten their meals, the real show started. Robert was first up for speeches. He grabbed the microphone like he was about to deliver some keynote address at a conference, not talk about his daughter's upcoming wedding. He cleared his throat dramatically, ensuring all eyes were on him. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice booming across the room. "Tonight is about celebrating the union of 2 families, our Kate and, of course," he said my name like it left a bad taste in his mouth, pausing just long enough to make it awkward. I sat there trying to stay calm, but every word that came out of his mouth felt like a thinly veiled insult. He started talking about how proud he was of Kate, which would have been fine if he'd stopped there. "She's always been the star of our family," he continued, beaming at her. "She's always known what she wanted in life, and now she's marrying someone who'll keep her grounded." He smirked when he said that last part, and a couple of people actually chuckled. I just stared at him, wondering if I'd heard him right. Was he implying that I was somehow beneath his daughter? Then he launched into this story about how Kate was always a high achiever, even as a kid, and how it was a good thing she had their guidance to stay on the right track. At one point, he actually said, "We've always taught Kate to aim high," and while he might not be what we envisioned at first, he trailed off and let the sentence hang in the air, like it was supposed to be some kind of joke. I could feel my dad and sister glaring at him from across the table. Their faces reflected exactly how I felt, a mixture of shock and growing anger. Next up was Maria. She strutted to the microphone like she was accepting an award rather than giving a speech at her daughter's rehearsal dinner. Her speech started off okay. She talked about how much she loved Kate and how excited she was for the wedding. But then she started making these little digs about me that became increasingly difficult to ignore. She talked about how Kate was the perfect daughter who deserved the best in life. "It's a good thing she's patient," Maria said, with a knowing smile, "because she's taught him so much already." I almost choked on my water. What exactly had Kate taught me? How to bite my tongue while her parents insulted me in front of our families. Then Maria turned to face me directly, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We're so happy to welcome you into the family," she said sweetly. "It'll be nice to finally have someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty, right?" She laughed, and a few of her relatives joined in. I glanced at Kate, hoping she'd step in, or at least look uncomfortable with how her parents were talking about me. But she was smiling along with them like there was nothing wrong with what was happening. And just when I thought it couldn't possibly get worse, Robert got back up to the microphone. He clinked his glass to regain everyone's attention. "One last thing before we wrap this up," he announced. "I just want to acknowledge someone who's no longer with us but played a big role in shaping who he is, his mom, Eleanor." For a split second, I thought he might actually say something kind about my mother. My heart lifted slightly at the possibility that they might redeem themselves. But no. Instead, he said, "Eleanor was one of a kind." She had a habit of inserting herself into situations, didn't she? He laughed as if sharing some inside joke with the room. Always had an opinion about how things should be done, Maria chimed in from her seat. Oh, she definitely had strong opinions. Remember how she always insisted on helping us, even when we didn't ask? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were talking about my mom, my kind, generous, selfless mom. Like she was some nosy neighbor who couldn't mind her own business. Robert wasn't done yet. But in all seriousness, he continued, Eleanor was a generous woman. She helped us out a lot. Sometimes too much, if I'm being honest. He actually winked, like it was some kind of punchline. The room got quiet. Even some of their own family members looked uncomfortable now. But Robert just kept going, seemingly oblivious to the tension he was creating. We'll be sure to keep her spirit alive at the wedding, he said, raising his glass. Let's hope he doesn't inherit her enthusiasm for taking charge. We wouldn't want him meddling too much, right? That was it. I felt my face get hot and my fists clench under the table. I glanced at Kate, waiting for her to say something, anything, to shut her parents down. But she just laughed lightly and said, Oh, Dad, stop. Like it was all harmless fun. Harmless fun. They were mocking my mom's memory in front of a room full of people, and Kate thought it was funny. I couldn't believe it. I truly couldn't process what was happening. The worst part was that Robert and Maria acted like they were being charming and witty with their comments. They had these smug looks on their faces, like they thought everyone was laughing with them. When I looked around the room, though, I could see that wasn't the case. Many guests looked uncomfortable or were studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone. When Robert finally sat down, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. People awkwardly resumed eating, the clinking of forks and glasses the only sound as everyone tried to move on from the train wreck of a speech we'd just witnessed. Kate leaned over to me and whispered, Are you okay? Her tone was casual, like she was asking if I wanted more water, not if I was seething with rage after her parents had just publicly mocked my deceased mother. I didn't even look at her. I just nodded. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. But then Maria walked over to our table, her fake smile plastered across her face. I hope you weren't offended, she said, with sickeningly sweet insincerity. Robert and I just wanted to add a little humor. It's all in good fun. That's when something snapped inside me. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Are you serious right now? I said, my voice low but shaking with barely contained anger. So there I was, standing in the middle of the rehearsal dinner, with my chair slightly tipped back from how quickly I'd risen. The room had gone dead silent, like someone had muted the TV. All eyes were on me, but I didn't care anymore. My heart was pounding in my chest, my face burning hot with anger. But I knew I couldn't just let this slide. The mocking way Robert and Maria had spoken about my mom was already too much to bear. But that fake apology from Maria, acting like I was overreacting to their jokes, that was the final straw. Are you serious right now? I repeated, looking directly at Maria, who seemed frozen in place. She clearly hadn't expected me to actually call her out on her behavior. Robert looked up from his drink with an expression of annoyed surprise, as if I'd just insulted him rather than the other way around. Kate whispered, Stop, from beside me, but I ignored her. Let me get this straight, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear me clearly. You spent the entire night taking cheap shots at my mom, the woman who helped your family when no one else would. And now you're acting like it was just a joke? You think that's okay? Robert leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest with a smirk. Relax, he said dismissively. You're overreacting. It was all in good fun. Good fun, I shot back, incredulous. You called her meddling. You said she was too much. You mocked her generosity like it was some kind of character flaw. How was that good fun? The tension in the room was unbearable by this point. I could see Kate's cousins looking down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation unfolding before them. My dad was staring at Robert with an intensity that suggested he was barely restraining himself from jumping into the fray. My sister had her arms crossed, glaring daggers at Maria like she was waiting for her turn to jump in. Maria tried to laugh it off again, waving her hand dismissively. Oh, don't be so sensitive, she said. We were just sharing a few stories. Everyone knows how Eleanor liked to take charge. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity of these people was astounding. Take charge? My voice was rising now. She helped you. She saved your business when you were about to lose it. She paid for your oven repairs, your patio remodel, and your son's college tuition. And this is how you repay her? By turning her into some kind of joke at a rehearsal dinner? Robert sat up straighter, clearly annoyed now that I wasn't backing down. All right, that's enough, he said, trying to sound authoritative. We didn't mean any harm, but if you're going to throw a tantrum about it, maybe you're not ready for marriage. That comment showed everything about his character. How little respect he had for me or for the memory of my mother. Kate finally spoke up, tugging on my sleeve. Can we just go outside and talk? She pleaded. Please. I pulled my arm away from her grasp. No, Kate, we can't, I said firmly. Not until your parents understand how disrespectful they've been. Maria sighed dramatically, as if she was the victim in this scenario. This is supposed to be a happy occasion, she said. You're ruining the evening for everyone. I'm ruining the evening? My voice was shaking with barely controlled anger now. No, Maria, you ruined it the second you decided to trash my mom in front of everyone. I turned to Kate, who was looking increasingly distressed. And you just sat there and let it happen. Kate's face turned red with embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell which. I didn't know they were going to say all that, she said defensively. But you laughed, I shot back. You laughed at every single insult. You didn't even try to stop them. At this point, whispers were starting to pick up around the room. People were leaning toward each other, murmuring about the scene unfolding before them. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about them or what they thought of me. This was about standing up for my mom and her memory. Robert stood up from his chair, clearly fed up with my outburst. All right, if you're so offended, he said, pointing toward the door, maybe you should leave. For a moment, I considered it. I thought about just walking out, leaving them to their perfect little dinner and the mess they'd created. But then I looked around the room at my dad, my sister, and the few friends who had come to support me. They were all watching, waiting to see what I would do next. I realized I wasn't going to let Robert and Maria get away with their behavior. Not this time. No, I said firmly, standing my ground. I'm not leaving. Not until you understand what you've done. Robert opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off before he could speak. You act like my mom was some overbearing busybody, but without her, you wouldn't even have this restaurant connection you're so proud of. She didn't do any of that for recognition or praise. She did it because she genuinely cared about people, even people who didn't deserve her kindness. And now you're sitting here, trashing her memory like it's some kind of punchline. That's not just disrespectful, it's disgusting. The room went completely silent again. Even Robert looked taken aback, like he didn't know how to respond to my directness. Maria opened her mouth, but no words came out. Kate just sat there, staring at the table, her face a complicated mix of embarrassment and anger. Finally, Robert muttered, "We didn't mean it like that." "It doesn't matter how you meant it," I shot back. "What matters is how it came across. You don't get to rewrite who my mom was just because it suits your narrative. She deserved better than that. And honestly, so do I." With that, I stepped back from the table and grabbed my coat. "You want me to leave? Fine, but don't expect me to come back." My dad stood up immediately, ready to follow me out. My sister grabbed her purse and shot one last glare at Maria before joining us. A couple of my friends stood up too, looking unsure but supportive of my decision. Kate called after me, "Wait!" But I didn't stop. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, even though my heart was pounding in my chest and my hands were shaking with adrenaline. Outside, my dad put his hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Your mom would be proud." I nodded but didn't feel proud in that moment. I felt angry and betrayed by the woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. In that brief exchange at the dinner table, I'd realized something important. If Kate couldn't stand up for me, or for the memory of my mother, maybe she wasn't the person I thought she was. Part of me felt I'd done the right thing by walking out, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. If I left things as they were, Kate and her family would just spin the story however they wanted. They'd make me out to be the bad guy, the one who overreacted and made a scene. They'd frame it as me being too sensitive or unable to take a joke. No, I couldn't let that happen. This wasn't just about me and my feelings anymore. It was about my mom, her memory, and what I stood for as a person. I took a deep breath and turned to my dad. "I need to go back in there." "What?" my sister blurted out in disbelief. "Why? You don't owe them anything." "I know," I said, looking at her. "But I'm not leaving this unfinished. I need to make it clear to Kate, to her parents, to everyone in that room that I'm done for good." My dad hesitated for a moment, then nodded his understanding. "If that's what you need to do, we'll back you up." No, I said, shaking my head firmly. This is something I have to do on my own. My sister looked like she wanted to argue, but she held her tongue, respecting my decision. I turned and walked back toward the restaurant entrance, my stomach in knots, but my mind clearer than it had been in months. I wasn't walking back in there to cause more of a scene. I was walking back in there to end things once and for all. When I re-entered the dining room, people were whispering to each other, stealing glances at the door. Conversations abruptly halted as I walked in. Kate was still sitting at the table, her face pale with shock. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "What are you doing?" she asked, standing up. I ignored her question and walked straight to the front of the room where Robert and Maria were still seated, looking far too pleased with themselves. Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting me to return so quickly. Maria gave me that same fake sweet smile she'd been using all night. "Back so soon?" Robert asked sarcastically. I didn't bother responding to his taunt. Instead, I turned to face the entire room. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, loud enough for all to hear. The murmuring stopped instantly. All eyes were on me again, but this time I felt completely in control. My heart was still pounding, but I kept my voice steady and clear. "I have something I need to say," I began. I glanced at Kate, who was now standing frozen by the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I know this isn't the time or place anyone expected for this, but after what's happened tonight, I don't see any reason to wait." I took a deep breath and continued, "This wedding is off." The room erupted in chaos at my announcement. There were gasps, murmurs, and the scraping of chairs as people turned to each other in shock. Kate's jaw dropped and her hands flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered, but I held up my hand to stop her from saying anything more. The room went dead silent again. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, standing frozen in corners of the room, witnessing the drama unfold. I turned back to address the rest of the guests. "This isn't just about tonight," I said firmly. "This is about the kind of family I'd be marrying into. A family that doesn't respect me, doesn't respect my mom's memory, and doesn't respect the values I was raised with. I can't and I won't spend the rest of my life being treated like this." Robert finally found his voice. "You're making a big mistake, kid," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're throwing away a good thing over nothing." I laughed bitterly at his response. "Nothing? You think disrespecting my mom is nothing? You think treating me like I'm less than you is nothing? No, Robert. The mistake would be going through with this wedding and tying myself to a family that doesn't deserve me." Maria looked like she was about to cry, or maybe she was just embarrassed that their little show had backfired so spectacularly. "Let's not make decisions in the heat of the moment," she said, her voice shaky. "We can talk about this tomorrow when everyone's had a chance to cool down." "No," I said firmly. "We're not talking about this tomorrow, or ever. This is done." I turned to Kate one last time. Her face was streaked with tears as she stood there, looking like she didn't know whether to scream at me or beg me to reconsider. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered how she'd laughed along with her parents' jokes at my mother's expense, and any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. I walked back toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the silent room. As I reached for the handle, I heard Kate call after me one last time. "Please don't do this," she pleaded. I paused for a moment, my hand on the door. Then I turned back and said simply, "I already did." Walking out of that restaurant for the second time felt like ripping off a bandage that had been covering a festering wound. There was a sting, sure, but the overwhelming feeling was one of relief. It was over. The wedding. The constant disrespect. The feeling of being second best in a family I was supposed to join. All of it was behind me now, and despite the pain, I knew I'd made the right decision. The next morning, the real fallout began. I woke up to about 100 unread messages on my phone. Most were from Kate, with a few from Robert and Maria, and even a couple from random relatives of hers who I barely knew. The tone of these messages ranged from pleading to outright nasty. Kate's texts were full of apologies. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please just talk to me." Robert's were more aggressive. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone. You'll regret this." And Maria, she tried to play the victim card. "I can't believe you do this to Kate." She didn't deserve this. I ignored all of them. I had said everything I needed to say the night before. By mid-afternoon, Kate showed up at my apartment. I knew it was coming and had been bracing myself for this confrontation all day, but that didn't make it any easier. When I opened the door, I was shocked by her appearance. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red and puffy. her face blotchy from crying. She was still wearing the dress from the night before, as if she'd gone straight home and cried herself to sleep without even changing. "Can we please talk?" she asked softly, her voice shaking with emotion. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, creating a physical barrier between us. "What's there to talk about, Kate? I made myself pretty clear last night." She flinched like I'd slapped her, but she didn't back down. "I know you're angry," she said, "and you have every right to be. But we can fix this. We can work through it." I shook my head, frustrated that she still didn't understand. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't something we can just work through." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice cracking as she said, "I was scared, okay? I didn't know what to do." "Scared of what?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "Scared of upsetting your parents? Scared of making a scene?" She didn't have an answer. She just stood there crying while I stared at her, waiting for something, anything, that would make me believe she actually understood what she'd done. But nothing came. Her eyes widened pleadingly as she took a step closer to me. "Please," she whispered. "Don't do this. We can make it work. I'll talk to my parents. I'll make them apologize. Just don't end it like this." I shook my head again. "It's not just about your parents, Kate," I explained. "It's about you. Last night showed me exactly who you are, and I can't unsee it. I deserve better than this." She stared at me for a moment, her face crumpling as the reality sank in that I wasn't going to change my mind. I closed the door gently but firmly, marking the end of our relationship. I thought that would be the end of it, but there was one more betrayal waiting for me. One Saturday afternoon a few weeks later, I was cleaning out my mom's old keepsake box, something I'd held onto and treasured since she passed away. Inside were things like her favorite necklace, a pair of earrings she wore to church every Sunday, and a small, delicate locket with a picture of my grandmother inside. That locket had been in my family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter. Mom had given it to me before she passed. "One day you'll know the right person to give this to," she'd said. I'd kept it tucked safely in the box ever since. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of her, of our family history. But when I opened the box that day, it was gone. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I tore the box apart, carefully searching through every corner, but the locket wasn't there. I checked the drawers where I kept the box, the shelves nearby, even the floor around it. Nothing. My heart sank as the realization hit me. Someone had taken it. The only person who'd been in my apartment recently, besides family and close friends, was Kate. My stomach churned as I pieced it together. She'd come over a few days after the breakup to drop off the engagement ring. She'd asked to use the bathroom before she left, and I thought nothing of it at the time. But now it all made sense. I grabbed my phone and texted her. "Did you take the locket from my mom's keepsake box?" A few minutes later, she replied, "What are you talking about?" I didn't buy her feigned ignorance for a second. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The locket my mom left me, it's gone. You're the only person who's been in my apartment recently. Did you take it?" She didn't respond right away, but when she did, her message made my blood boil. "I borrowed it because I wanted to keep a piece of her with me. I thought it would help me feel closer to you." Borrowed. She had borrowed a family heirloom without asking, without even telling me. I couldn't believe the audacity. I called her immediately. When she picked up, she sounded defensive, as if she was somehow the victim in all this. "It's not a big deal," she said dismissively. "I was going to give it back." "Not a big deal?" I snapped. "That locket has been in my family for generations. It's not some trinket you can just take because you feel like it. How could you even think that was okay?" "I just wanted to feel connected to you," she said, her voice trembling. I could tell she was trying to play the sympathy card. "I didn't think you'd notice." "Of course I'd notice!" I shouted, unable to contain my anger any longer. "It's my mom's! And the fact that you didn't think to ask me first makes it even worse." She started crying at that point, but I wasn't in the mood to comfort her. This was beyond the pale, a violation of trust that I couldn't forgive. "Where is it?" I demanded. "It's at my parents' house," she admitted through her sobs. I didn't want to lose it, so I left it there for safekeeping. That was the last straw. I was furious now. "You took something that didn't belong to you," I said, my voice cold with anger. "Something that means more to me than you'll ever understand. And you just left it at your parents' house? Are you kidding me?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I replied. "I'm coming to get it now." An hour later, I was pulling up to Robert and Maria's house. My anger had only grown during the drive. By the time I knocked on their door, I was ready to explode. Maria opened it, her fake sweet smile fading when she saw the look on my face. "What are you doing here?" she asked cautiously. "I'm here to get my mom's locket," I said bluntly. "Kate told me it's here." Maria's face shifted into a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Kate took a locket? Why would she—" "Just get it," I interrupted, not interested in her theatrics. She narrowed her eyes at me but stepped aside to let me in. I stood in their entryway, arms crossed, refusing to move further into their home than necessary. A few minutes later, Kate came downstairs holding the locket in her hand. Her eyes were red, and her face was blotchy from crying, but I didn't care. All I saw was the locket dangling from her fingers like it was nothing special. "Here," she said simply, holding it out to me. I snatched it from her hand and inspected it carefully, making sure it was the same one and that it hadn't been damaged. When I was satisfied, I stuffed it in my pocket where it would be safe. I turned to leave without another word. "Wait!" Kate called after me, her voice desperate. "I didn't mean to upset you, I was just—" "You stole from me, Kate," I cut her off. "From my mom, like what you'd already done wasn't enough." Her face crumpled and she started crying again, but I didn't stop. I walked out the door and slammed it behind me, feeling nothing but relief to be away from her and her family. In the days that followed, I blocked Kate's number, deleted all her messages, and cut off every possible way for her to contact me. I was completely done with her, her family, and all the drama they had brought into my life. As painful as the breakup had been, retrieving the locket felt like the final chapter in our story. The theft of something so precious to me was the final confirmation that I'd made the right decision in ending our relationship. As draining as it was, handling the aftermath of the canceled wedding and dealing with Kate's betrayal also felt like closure. I'd stood up for myself, for my mom, and for the values she'd instilled in me. I knew without a doubt that I'd made the right choice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with my decision. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that were there all along. The way Kate never fully appreciated what my mom had done for her family. The way she dismissed my grief after mom passed away. The small but telling comments about my background, and her constant deference to her parents' opinions and judgments. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were glimpses into who she really was as a person, and who she would have continued to be as my wife. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet at that rehearsal dinner. If I'd swallowed my pride and let Robert and Maria's comments slide, just to keep the peace. I might be married to Kate now, living a life where I was constantly made to feel less than, where my feelings and my family's memory were never truly respected. The thought makes me shudder. Instead, I chose to honor my mom. Not just her memory, but the lessons she taught me about self-respect and standing up for what's right. She showed me through her own actions that kindness doesn't mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. She was generous to a fault, but she also knew her own worth. That's the legacy she left me, and it's one I intend to carry forward. I may have lost the woman I thought I was going to marry, but in the process, I found something more valuable. The strength to be true to myself and the values I hold dear. The locket now sits in a new, special place in my home, not hidden away in a box, but displayed where I can see it every day. It reminds me of my mom, yes, but it also reminds me of the importance of surrounding yourself with people who genuinely care about you, who respect you for who you are, and who would never mock what matters most to you. I don't know what the future holds for me romantically. For now, I'm focusing on healing and rebuilding. But I do know this. When I eventually meet someone new, I'll be bringing clearer boundaries and stronger expectations to the relationship. And when the time is right, I'll know exactly who deserves to receive that locket, continuing the tradition my mother entrusted to me. Have any of you ever had to make a difficult decision like this? Walking away from someone you loved because you realized they weren't who you thought they were? It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most necessary. I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to stand up for myself when it mattered most.